I'm Steph Garcia with AthleticDirectorU and D1 Ticker, and I'm thrilled to be on the beautiful campus of San Jose State to sit down with Athletic Director Jeff Konya. Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
Thanks for
How are
having
you?
me. I'm
Thank
great.
you. Yeah.
I'm having a great time so far.
Awesome.
So let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Building a sense of commitment to a program with employees, student athletes, coaches, stakeholders is a top priority for any new AD. You're no stranger to the big chair, having had held the athletic director role at 3 other institutions. What is the secret to developing buy-in from day one?
That's a great question. I think when you take over, you have preconceived notions, or you have some perceptions about a place that you think your ideas are going to match what the organization needs. Mm-hmm. But I like to take a little bit of a pause and go right to the key stakeholders mm-hmm. and have a conversation there. So we facilitated here at San Jose State conversations with our key stakeholders. We had sessions with our season tickets, the AD Council, our student athletes, our SAC, folks on campus, our coaches, and we ran through what's called a sticky note exercise. Okay. And basically it's a way to do brainstorming that invites everyone to participate and everybody can share their thoughts, and it's done very, very efficiently. And so that is really helpful because it reconfirms some of your perceptions, but it also may illuminate some other aspects of, as you're learning the culture and the community, some other things to consider and that you're going to have to strategically plan for. And then based off of that conversation and where you think your basic strengths are, I'm a big believer of leveraging strengths. Yeah, you can take care of some of your weaknesses, but to be a true difference maker, you have to leverage your strengths. And so then it turns into strategic planning. And again, it's more conversation and it's more collaboration with the team so that we can get to some of the key action items that is going to be able to take advantage of some of our opportunities in that space.
So what are the key components of organizational culture? And would you say that, again, you've had different stops throughout your career. How do you change with each institution that you are a part of?
That's a very good question. Well, first of all, about culture, I think there's an old saying that culture eats strategy for lunch or breakfast or dinner, whatever time of the day you're eating, yeah. Right? So obviously there's something to culture and there's something to that vibe. And I think culture ultimately over time is reflected in how you choose to best recognize your accomplishments. So when you have a student athletes award show, what are the things that you're bringing forward? Is it only athletic success? Is it blending academic success? Is it community service? Is it leadership? Is it past alumni? What are these components that you're choosing to recognize? And then you're creating those carrots for your student athletes in this case. But as you're doing that, you have to recognize your staff. You have to celebrate incremental wins, especially early on in tenures, so that there's a reinforcement as to what the expectation is going to be. And as I've taken over, I think I've learned to be a little bit more patient. I'm not great at patience, but
you're a competitor.
But I do think you have all these ideas running, and when you're trying to implement a bunch of change, and we're in a huge change dynamic here at San Jose State, trying to take advantage of that. You want to have patience so that everyone can see and be part of these decision-making matrix, so that they feel it. Employees that feel valued in the process tend to be more productive employees, just like athletes that feel good about where they are tend to play better in competition. Absolutely. So I think, so we've been able to take all of our strategies, we've done all this inclusion, and we've been able to yield some pretty impressive results with our culture in mind. And I think our culture is starting to represent some really key things like innovation. And as we talk about what we're doing innovatively, we've been able to come together and take advantage of some of our opportunities in the external space. We had our first regional broadcast for football. We've had a deal that we've signed where we're going to do some storytelling, kind of like a 30 on 30 segment for our students to get the stories out on NBC regional here. As well as our award show is going to be broadcast. So those are some of the spaces. And then through these brainstorming exercises, we also created a framework to get our story out even more on more media platforms. So we have the Charge, which is our 24/7 HD signal, internet, radio station, radio network actually, that's going to house a lot of our games, our content, Q&As, fan feedback, but also we've opened that up in the NIL space so that our student athletes can tell their stories and they can brand themselves and then utilize and possibly monetize that very content. So it's been really, really cool. All this under the banner of our new vision statement that everybody collaborated with, which is also called the Charge, i.e. another secondary marketing component as we move forward.
Well, tell me a little bit more about that vision statement.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? What does the Charge mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the Charge is something that everyone can point to as, hey, we now have this vision statement of what we want to achieve. We all have a purpose for why we have our jobs. We see how we fit in to where we're trying to move as an organization, as a department. And so it's a living, almost constitution of where we need to be mindful of and how we can make the most impact. And so we're very intentional in our word choice. Things like transformative and innovative and being a first choice destination. These are intentional parts of that Charge, so that as we start to measure our success, we can always reflect back on, are we achieving with what we had in mind when we initially set out with all these strategic plans and these action steps.
Well, pivoting back, you mentioned a vibe earlier. Mm-hmm. You had a conversation about 60 days into your tenure with Mountain West Conference Connection.
You did your research.
I did.
Okay.
And you mentioned feeling a little maybe surprised that the student athletes themselves really embraced and embodied a family culture.
Yeah.
How are you going to tap into that family culture, spirit, and vibe to implement your vision, to implement the Charge, to get this long-term buy-in from the entire San Jose State family?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in actions and not words. And I think a lot of organizations tend to use, we want to be a family, but there's no meat behind it. Mm-hmm. There's no substance behind it. So as I've come on board here, what's been really refreshing is just how many Spartan student athletes across all of our teams support one another. They really come out to the games, they're fired up, they're energized, they travel to watch away competitions. And it's even more impressive because our athletic department has a 1.7 mile separation between most of our sports. We have sports that exist on the main campus, we have sports that exist here in the South Campus footprint, but that distance and that division is not felt by our student athletes, and they're able to come together and interact. And so a lot of kudos goes to our coaches, our head coaches, that are some of the most supportive that I've ever been around. Mm-hmm. That is something that could become a special sauce within our entire organization. The student athletes are leading by example as to what's important to them. Mm-hmm. And so we can take cues and make sure that that's part of our culture that we're building underneath the Charge.
I love that. Well, speaking about culture and organization and priorities, let's go to your presentation.
Yeah, okay, I'll be the resident professor here.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Okay, so when we're talking about inheriting an organization, athletic department, anything really, I like to call it the rule of thirds. Again, this is massive generalizations. This entire presentation is predicated on my experiences, books I've read, and a certificate degree I got in the SMU Cox School of Business on advanced leadership and management. So basically, I implement, whenever you inherit a situation, most of the employees or the staff or folks, constituents, are in three buckets. Those that want the change, those that are against the change, and that those are waiting to see how it goes, right? And what one of my senior deputy athletic director, Rob Clark, said, this is the most important third because that's going to ultimately define your culture, right? These are the swing votes, and they're going to vote with their attitude and their effort, right? So as you take over, and have this in mind as we go through this, because at any one time you really have this going on, and it's this middle third that is going to be that swing vote category. So over here we have organizational output, very generic, just like how are we doing as an organization, and here's time. So we have a 5-year cycle. And again, this is just from my experiences and all of that research. So let's just arbitrarily say when you inherit an organization, we're here.
Yep.
Okay? Could be here, it doesn't matter. So your first 90 to 120 days, there is an uptick. There's an uptick, and you can feel it. And why does this occur? Because there's new energy, there's new change, there may be hope. I call this the hope curve.
Some people call it the honeymoon phase.
Honeymoon phase, all that. But also, your employees are on their best behavior. They're trying to put their best foot forward. Let's see how this thing goes. Sometime after 90 to 120 days, you tend to start having a drop-off. And actually, over time, to like 1 year, in my experience, it may even dip below the starting point, and then it starts to come back to about even at year 1. And why does this occur? Well, folks, go back to prior habits. This hope is not necessarily translating into tangible results. And so this is foundational work that's going on here, and it takes time for the foundations to bear fruit. So there's this perception that not enough is going on, people are falling back to their habits, and then it's that old overcorrection. Boy, we're really hopeful, oh, now we're let down. So our biorhythms, our energy, our attitude, all that kind of bottoms out at about 9 months. And then why does this start to take root here? It's because some of that planning, some of that execution starts coming into the organization. So the plans now have had time to adjust and we start feeling those results. So there you go. So this is a real pivotal point, because if you're able to minimize this downslide, you're going to end up higher as an organization, as you'll see. Again, just my perspective. So as we move on to year 2, you're going to have ups and downs, but by year 3, year 4, all right, you are moving higher as an organization, right? Whatever planning you've done, it's good. People are feeding off of the energy of the positive outcomes. The culture's taking root. Culture eats strategy for lunch. Your culture is starting to build. And then you get to this point in between year 3 and year 4, and you start to plateau again. And then by year 4 and year 5, you start seeing a decrease. Okay? So why does this happen? And how can you prevent that from happening as you're building your culture and the action steps from your plans as you're strategizing take root? I call this complacency. So what happens over time is, as organizations have success, you may lose some of your key members of your team, and you have to replace them. So that causes some of this same stuff, right? A little turbulence in the organization. Also, when you have the success, people feel pretty good, like, wow, we've arrived. You think about in terms of like athletic teams who also could have a similar curve like this. And they're like, well, we've arrived. So maybe you just take that pressure off the gas pedal a little bit. So all this psychology is going on, and then you start to have a little bit of an organizational slide. The interesting perspective as you think through this is, if this is new and people haven't been there a long time, then as the employees are coming up, right, their mindset, you have to be mindful people of mindsets. As people are going up this curve, they're saying, hey, we're pretty good, right? We're really good, we're doing a good job. Then when you start feeling this kind of an effect from the organization, that's the conscious of crisis. Like, what is going on in the organization? Why are we having these results? And then to me, and I think fellow IDs will share this, and maybe anybody who's over massive organizations, the average tenure of presidents and ADs are about 5 years.
Interesting.
So, again, perceptions rule.
It reboots the cycle.
It reboots the cycle.
You get new people in there, and you start from the beginning.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what is your game plan to make sure that we don't
should that be part 2, or should I reveal the I don't know if there's answers to this, but I can certainly share what we're trying to do as part of building this culture.
Absolutely.
So again, there's these 2 inflection points. One's really early on in a tenure, and one's after you have some modicum of success, right? So you have the hope and you have the complacency. And I think here, again, it's a value proposition. The more that you can collaborate and have employees feel valued and celebrate those small wins, and keep the narrative and have that vision alive, it's really, really going to help you, right? So that you can kind of gauge your employees. So if you can just modify that curve a little bit, because again, this isn't linear, but if you can modify that curve, that's certainly going to help. And then over here with complacency, as you're starting to lose key members, you have to invest in your employees. You have to keep your all-stars. Invest in the all-stars, right? They're the ones that are going to have the most bang for the buck, right? Those are the ones that have to have the progression in the organization. They're the ones that have to have a path forward to get more and more responsibility. The other thing too is you have to change the metrics here. So let's say if you think about it in terms of a team, all right, maybe you win a championship, right? So now maybe the goal is to be top 20, right? You change the game, right? You change the vision, you change the sight line, because if it's simply about repeating, all right, it's the kind of the been there, done that. But if you change the game, then maybe you have a chance to minimize this and autocorrect.
Well, isn't there that saying that, once you get to the top, it's
harder to stay. Yep.
So what, in your experience, is kind of that secret sauce to effectively changing those metrics to keep your employees, on point with the values of the organization and with kind of chasing greater and greater carrots?
Well, I think as part, it's easier to say in terms of teams, but in terms of organizations, I think the metrics are defined on two levels. One, you have to be very intentional when you're talking about employee reviews and how the individual and what outcomes or output they're providing. Celebrate the successes, but also change and start challenging and putting more carrots, maybe through bonus structures or something like that. So you're incentivizing. The second thing is you change the metrics as the overall organization. So if it's 150,000 Twitter followers that we're at, we're going for 250,000, and that's our goal because X institutions there, and that's our new comparable. So I think those are the different ways in the different areas of marketing and PR and academic performance and all that we can coalesce around organizational goals.
Well, let's zoom out a little bit more and look beyond just your athletic department. How do you, work with the other key stakeholders on campus side, on the academic side, and how do you get them to be part of this process and this vision?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, at various points, and here's the real challenging part when you're an athletic director. So I'll answer your question, but one of the things that is very complex athletic organizations is this is the curve from my standpoint or an athletic director in terms of change. But programs are all over the board with respect to their own curves and performances. You may have programs here, they're here. People have outlasted 5 years, so they're in a completely different space. So that's the piece that you have to navigate, and that's why that vision of the charge is really important so that everybody's grounded as to what we're trying to expect. That's what's important when you start working with campus constituents, right? They also need to understand what the return on investment is in intercollegiate athletics. If you can show that through your vision, if you can show that through the metrics, if you can show that through the performance, or if they just feel it through the energy and the culture, it's going to leave an impression.
I love that. Well, the last major challenge for you in particular is, now you are going to be looking at a new president, probably going to have an interim for a while, or, how will you navigate that turbulence over there to keep this on track, keep your vision on track?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I was hired by Dr. Mary Papazian, and she just recently resigned for a wide variety of factors. I was really looking forward to working with her. I thought we really had personalities that would click and yield. But I have to say that our cabinet, our leadership at this university is very tight, very emotionally intelligent, very supportive. It's a very productive room. And I'm confident that the collective is going to be able to talk through a whole bunch of issues, including intercollegiate athletics and what's the return on investment for this campus. That said, once we have a new president come on board, either interim or permanent, then it's my opportunity to talk through our vision and the return on investment on a personal level and see if that matches their expectations of what they'd like to achieve in the intercollegiate athletic space.
It's going to be an exciting challenge.
It will be.
So to wrap it up,
By the way, I've had 3 presidents within 4 years at a previous stop, so every circumstance is just a little bit different, right? And I think it's always, again, grounded in what is that return on investment and how does intercollegiate athletics play a part for the broader campus community?
Well, and I think that there's certainly the challenge of some, campus stakeholders that don't always understand that return on investment or why it's important to kind of buy in. And so have you experienced that, and has that, how have you navigated that?
Not really. I think that there's different things that we choose to value, perhaps, but it's such a dynamic operation, intercollegiate athletics, that touches student life and traditions and alumni and pride, but revenue and exposure and branding, and then the student athlete experience, and just that dynamic on campus, that I think there's a part for everyone that can grab hold on to just how dynamic this is. So depending on what is the new vision of the president, right, and how they're going to set up and structure their culture and their expectations, there's room for intercollegiate athletics to be a big player in whatever is the outcome there.
So let's go back, rewind to your first hour here on campus. What advice would you?
I don't know. My memory's shot. I don't know.
What advice would you?
Why don't we
give
go to
yourself?
the first, maybe minute?
Yep.
No, the first. Well, I think I said it earlier. It's that patience piece. Especially when you're active and you want to change, and you get the ratification through all your conversations, and you want to move, and you want to move the needle. That's how we're wired in intercollegiate athletics. It's not a static environment at all. In fact, you can see what's going on the national landscape. It is not static. It is always moving. The cheese is moving, and you have to be very comfortable working in like an ER triage setting where you're prioritizing based off of new inputs each and every day. That said, it's still about patience, because you can't short circuit success and you can't short circuit process. If you do, it's going to ultimately affect your culture. Postscript. So now I am the interviewer. I'm your host, Jeff Konya, San Jose State Athletic Director. I'm joined by Stephanie, former University of Virginia star track and field athlete in the sport of steeplechase. And so since she's put me on the spot so often during this conversation, it's only fair that I get to ask her one question. And Stephanie,
I'm ready.
when you were going through your experience as a student athlete, what were your expectations of your director of athletics?
The challenge of being a student athlete is that your ambition is unlimited. You want to be the very best in your sport. That's why you're a student athlete. That's why you're continuing your career at, the Division 1, 2, 3 level. But at the same time, you need to remember that there's life after sport. And so I would love for athletic directors to understand that very intricate balance of needing to give your athletes the best athletic experience and boost them, give them the resources so that they can go out and win championships, be an All-American, fulfill that very unique dream, but at the same time, keep them balanced with life after sport, because there are too many athletes that walk away with maybe a general education degree and really don't have a lot of direction or understanding of who they are outside of a competitor. And so it is really hard. There are a lot of athletes that probably would resist that and don't want to go to the academic support staff or do extra things that take them away from training. But making sure that your department has infused with that culture of that we are well-rounded individuals, not just well-rounded on the field or the court. I think that's just the key. I really believe in the student athlete experience. I know college sports are becoming more professionalized with NIL. I think that's amazing, but that's an opportunity to also teach finances, business savvy, how to market yourself. Those are all things that we need moving into the next phase of our life after sport.
well, you're going to have to come back and do the part 2 with myself, because we can then explore the Beyond Sparta program, which hands down is the best professional life skills program here in Silicon Valley for our student athletes.
Absolutely.
And that's what we call a segue.
Thanks so much, Jeff.
Thank you.